History remembers its heroes, but it rarely looks into the eyes of those it condemned. For every empire built, there was a pyre burning beneath it. For every crown raised, a scaffold waited in the courtyard. And though centuries have passed, the echo of the last scream still lingers in the soil of every civilization. This is not a tale of cruelty alone. It is the story of how humanity, in the name of order, faith, and power, learned to destroy its own with the tools it forged for salvation. It began where civilization began, in the empires that first taught mankind to write, to build, and to burn. Long before words like justice and mercy found meaning, power was the law, and pain was its language. In ancient Persia, the punishment for treason was Scaphism, a name almost too gentle for what it was. The condemned was trapped between boats, fed milk and honey until his body became a banquet for the living earth. It was not execution. It was erasure. To the Persians, it was order. To us, it is horror carved in silence. Across the desert, the Babylonians built their codes on stone. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. The first justice, they called it. But even then, it was the poor who bled most often, and the powerful who chose which eyes to blind. In Rome, they called it exemplum, to make an example of one, so the rest might obey. Crucifixion, not for killing, but for humiliation. The body was nailed to wood not to end life quickly, but to stretch it thin until even the soul wished to flee. The Romans didn't invent pain, they perfected the silence between screams. And in that silence, a carpenter from Galilee would hang and turn execution into faith. From death came a religion. From the cross, a symbol that outlived the empire that forged it. The ancient world burned bright and fast. It taught humanity that death could be public theater, that justice, when watched by the crowd, was no longer mercy, but spectacle. The torches of empire gave way to the candles of cathedrals. The sword was replaced by scripture, but the fire never died. The Middle Ages were an age of devotion and fear. Kings ruled by divine right, and where faith and power merged, judgment became holy. The Inquisition whispered one truth across Europe: to doubt was death, to question was sin. And so they built their altars not in churches, but in chambers of iron. The rack, the wheel, the stake, tools born not from hatred, but from conviction. Because when pain wears the mask of salvation, even the kindest hands can turn cruel. In France, Joan d'Arc, a girl who heard voices of angels, was bound and burned by men who feared the echo of her faith. They said her ashes would scatter and be forgotten. Instead, they carried her to sainthood. In England, the executioner's axe became a familiar rhythm. Royal blood spilled on stone as easily as commoners. Anne Boleyn, queen turned traitor, bowed her head to steel and became legend, a single strike birthing centuries of intrigue and reform. And in the corners of Europe's darkest night, the witch trials began. Thousands of women, healers, midwives, widows, burned for knowing too much or simply for being alone. Their names were erased. Their screams were hymns no church recorded. The Middle Ages taught humanity a dangerous lesson, that morality could be weaponized, that belief, when absolute, could make monsters of the righteous. Then came reason, or so we thought. The Renaissance painted beauty, the Enlightenment preached liberty, and yet the 18th century would discover that even enlightenment casts shadows. In France, revolution was born from hunger and hope. The people demanded justice. What they got was the blade, the guillotine, the national razor, swift, efficient, equal. They said it was humane. It was also tireless. The streets of Paris ran red not with tyranny's blood, but with the heads of its makers. For every king that fell, 1,000 citizens followed. As one observer wrote, the revolution devours its own children. Elsewhere, across oceans, new nations were forming. Colonial empires justified their chains by claiming to civilize the people they enslaved. But when rebellion came, in Haiti, in India, in the colonies, the price of freedom was written in public executions. The gallows became the dialogue between rulers and the ruled. In 19th century America, the hangman's rope whispered its own cruel rhythm, from frontier justice to darker times that followed. Even as technology advanced, our thirst for retribution stayed primitive. And yet, something began to change. Witnesses started to write, artists began to paint. For the first time, humanity saw itself through its victims' eyes. The 20th century promised progress, science, democracy, rights. And yet, it became the bloodiest century in human history. Wars industrialized death. Nations perfected efficiency, not in mercy but in annihilation. Gas chambers, firing squads, electric chairs, new tools, same silence. But this time the world could see. Photographs replaced scrolls. Film captured what kings once hid. And so the spectacle of execution lost its power, because for the first time we could feel the humanity in those who fell. Governments called it justice. Societies called it deterrence. But the world began to ask a question it had never dared before. What does killing prove when it's done in the name of order? The gallows were dismantled, the fires put out, but the memory remained, etched in the quiet of the modern conscience. Some nations abolished the death penalty, others kept it in silence. Executions moved from the public square to the sealed chamber, no longer theater but bureaucracy. And in that sterile quiet, a strange irony was born. When humanity stopped watching, it did not mean it stopped killing. It simply stopped feeling. From the deserts of Babylon to the steel chambers of the present, the story has never really changed. We are creatures of justice, and yet our justice has always carried a blade. History does not weep for the condemned. It listens to the faint heartbeat beneath the noise of progress. Every civilization believed it was right. Every ruler believed they were just. And in that belief, the line between righteousness and cruelty blurred again and again. But perhaps history's greatest punishment is that we remember. Because in remembering, we are forced to see not their deaths, but our reflection in them. When humanity burned its own, the fire has dimmed, but its ashes still whisper, "Never again."